Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Boy oh boy do we have a good one today, as we're about to witness Freeland make a complete fool of herself as she went on to have an interview with Vassy in regards to the capital gains tax that we just covered the other day. Now, I do want to make a small correction to yesterday's video, where I believe I said the vote for the capital gains was happening on June 25th, when actually it happened today on June 11th, and if it went through, it'd be implemented on June 25th. So my apologies for that error. However, in regards to the vote, this is how it went.
Ms. Freeland, seconded by Mr. Blair, moves that a Ways and Means motion to introduce an act to amend the Income Tax Act and the income tax regulations be concurred in.
The table will now compile the results of the vote.
Yeas pour 208, 208. Nays contre 118, 118.
I declare the motion carried.
So yeah, unfortunately the Conservatives were seemingly the only ones to vote no to the capital gains tax, but Freeland, as I said, still decided to go on to Vassy's to talk about this, and Vassy lays it in on her. So let's get into it.
Debate there in the House of Commons ahead of a key vote on a contentious tax proposal. The vote went the government's way. 208 votes in favor of the motion, 118 against. The Tories were the ones to vote against the Liberals' plan to increase Canada's capital gains inclusion rate, calling it a, quote, as you heard there, job killer. The Liberals, as you also heard there, are meanwhile accusing the Tories of voting against tax fairness. The changes coming into effect on June 25th will see the capital gains inclusion rate increase from 1/2 to 2/3 on gains above $250,000 for individuals and on all capital gains realized by most corporations and trusts. Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Freeland is with us here live in studio to talk more about the issue. Hi, Minister. Good to see you. Thanks for making the time.
Hi, Vassy. And you gave a great, concise summary. The only little summary thing I'll add super quickly is principal residences continue to be fully exempted from capital gains.
And I understand why you're making that point, because people are going to be very worried if they sell their house, are they going to be subject to a higher tax rate? So I get why you're making
It's most people's biggest asset, and
sure.
so it's important to let people know that.
So I wanted to start off, Minister, and ask you if, from your perspective, this is about sound economic policy or about cornering the Conservatives?
Sound economic policy.
Why?
Because we believe in fairness for every generation. And we know that right now Canada needs to make investments. We need to make big investments in housing, big investments in affordability, things like a national school food program, early learning and childcare, dental care, big investments in jobs and growth, things like our $5 billion investment in basic research. And we know that to pay for those investments, the way to do it is through tax fairness, because we know we have to do it in a fiscally responsible way. When we were putting the budget together, it was really important for me to be fiscally responsible so we could support the Bank of Canada and get to a place where the bank could lower interest rates. They did that last week, first country in the G7 to start on the downward path. That's really important for Canadians.
So right off the bat here, she's talking about fiscal responsibility and mentions the budget. Well, we've already covered this in another video, but I figured we'd take a look at it again. Budget 2024. If we scroll down, all the way down to, where is it? The debt management strategies for the government, right? Does this sound fiscally responsible to you? The outlook for the government and Canada's debt. Planned borrowing activities, the source of borrowing. The aggregated principal amount of money to be borrowed by the government in 2024 to 2025 is projected to be $508 billion, 83% of which will be used to refinance maturing debt. Really? That's fiscally responsible? The majority of the money that you're going to be borrowing is only going to be going towards the debt that you guys have accumulated over the 9 years? Call me crazy, but I don't think that sounds fiscally responsible at all. And I'm not the only one. As you're going to hear, Vassy pushes back at her.
The things you're talking about, though, dental care, Canada Child Benefit, daycare, they tally up to far more on an annual basis than this will bring in over 5 billion years. Why are you presenting it as a panacea to all that?
I'm not presenting it as a panacea, but I am presenting it as a meaningful way to raise money to fund the things that Canadians need. It's nearly $20 billion over the fiscal framework, and it is a fair way to do it. Because right now in Canada, the reality is a nurse or a plumber can pay tax at a higher marginal rate than a multimillionaire. That's not fair. So if we need money to make investments in Canada and Canadians, this is the fair way to do it.
I think you did present it as a panacea. I'm going to challenge the way that you're framing that based on your comments on Sunday. I'll read them directly to you. Do you want to live in a country where those at the very top live lives of luxury, but must do so in gated communities behind ever higher fences, using private healthcare and airplanes because the public sphere is so degraded and the wrath of the vast majority of their less privileged compatriots burns so hot? This is going to fix all that. And what responsibility does your government bear for putting us in that position in the first place?
Holy shit. Vassy just went straight for Freeland's jugular. And to be honest, I'm not that surprised. Vassy comes very prepared. She usually has her ducks in a row. She knows how to clap back really well when it comes to these guys trying to spin their little stories and their lies. And Freeland actually can't lie about this because in yesterday's video, we played the clips from her Sunday announcement of her saying all of that. She did frame it as a panacea, an end-all be-all cure, that the capital gains would solve all of our problems right now. As long as we just tax from the rich and give to everybody else, we'll be out of the debt and all the other situations that Canadians are in right now. And it was beautiful to see Vassy call her out and say, your government put us here after 9 years. But let's enjoy Freeland squirming for the rest of the interview as Vassy just keeps dunking on her.
This is really going to help Canada because $20 billion is a meaningful amount of money to invest in the things Canadians need. Standing for fairness is really important too. So this is an important measure. I am glad that we're putting it forward. I'm glad that it is paying for things like the biggest housing program in Canadian history. Things like dental care, things like our really important investments in AI. And what it's allowing us to do is make investments, do it in a fiscally responsible way, because we're building on a position of fairness. And I really find, I've been talking to a lot of Canadians, and when I talk to Canadians, they say, yeah, you're right. It is not fair for a teacher or a carpenter to be paying tax at a higher marginal rate than a multimillionaire. I think that makes sense to people.
But what's the proof point? Again, the second part of my question was, what responsibility does your government bear for putting us in a position where you yourself describe as the finance minister, the public sphere is so degraded? You talk about the money that your government is spending towards increasing the supply of housing. The CMHC says housing starts were down 7% nationally in 2023 from 2022 and expects them to further decline this year. Where's the proof point that the money you say that you're going to get from this additional revenue source is actually going to make Canadians' lives better?
Well, StatsCan actually reported today that permits are at a high, permits for new home building. So that is a very, very positive moment.
And what do you know? That's another point for Vassy, at least in my opinion, because if we take a look at what Freeland is talking about, Canada building permits jumped 20.5% in April. This came out today. We actually can read a little bit saying the increase was much stronger than 5% rise expected for the month by economists, according to TD Securities. And the mark is a rebound after a downward revised 12.3 drop in March. So building permits climbed 20.7 in April to the highest level since last June. That's great. However, over here, building permits provide an early indication of construction activity in Canada. The issuance of a permit does not guarantee that construction is imminent. Exactly what Vassy's trying to prove. Just because there's a huge influx in permits given doesn't mean diddly squat. Because if we go down here, housing starts slipped by 1% during April, and the 6-month moving average decreased 2.2%, data released by Canada Mortgage and Housing Corp showed. And the article continues to just talk about intentions that all to build. And still, the data agency said that despite a strong month of 12-month cumulative total of 267,700 units authorized from last May through April, saw little change, increasing by just 200 units compared to the same period before. So Freeland just loves to throw out, oh, there's this increase and there's that increase when she thinks that nobody actually does research or looks into what she's talking about. And especially going up against Vassy, you would think she would learn by now.
Yeah, but you need a permit before you build a house. And the fact that we have a fiscally responsible plan to invest in Canada and Canadians has supported the Bank of Canada in something that is so important for Canadians, which is to be in a place where inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range for the past 4 months. That made it possible last week for the bank, the first country in the G7, to lower rates. But I do want to come back to what is at the heart of what we're doing. And what we're saying is we are a government that believes in fairness. We believe that everyone should be paying their fair share. We believe it's just not right for a teacher, a nurse, a plumber, an electrician to be paying tax at a higher marginal rate than a carpenter, than a multimillionaire. And that is what is the case right now in Canada.
And you believe only multimillionaires will be impacted by this? And I ask you that genuinely. I host a radio show during the day. I have been inundated the past 2 days with people who have called saying, I did not have a public sector job. I could not rely on a pension. So I decided to invest in a second rental property. I have worked nonstop in order to be able to do that. And I have paid taxes along the whole way. And now I'm being told I'm among the ultra wealthy that has to fund the government's income redistribution plan, essentially. Like, how is that about fairness?
Well, first of all, I think it is really important for Canadians to be clear about what this measure actually is. And so, as you said in your really good introduction, the first $250,000 of capital gains every single year is going to continue to be taxed at the current rate. You just spoke about a rental property. That means if a couple owns a rental property, their first $500,000 of profit that they make is taxed at the current rate. That's a lot, and they can do that every single year. According to our calculations, 0.13% of Canadians will pay more every single year based on these measures.
But the other thing, just to challenge you for a second, that's just an annual basis, right? That's not. Some people will only pay capital gains once over their entire lifetime. So the number of people who may be impacted could be far greater than what your government has put forward. I know you want to characterize this as we're okay to go after the wealthy and the Conservatives are not. But there are a lot of people who do not feel wealthy who feel you are going after them. So again, I would really disagree with the greatest respect to some of the ways that you've characterized that. And I would just say this is not about going after anybody.
I honestly wonder what kind of drugs this woman is on majority of the time that she's speaking, because Vassy's here explaining to her that she has actual Canadians calling in and telling them their strife about how they're getting screwed over by the government. I mean, we just played in the last video the 93-year-old who's getting hit with $40,000 for trying to gift her family 2 plots of land. Not even sell, just gift it. And she's not wealthy by any means. She's stuck on a pension, but now has to pay 40 grand. And you have Freeland here saying, oh, we're actually not trying to target anybody, when all they've been talking about is targeting the 1% or the 0.13%, the multimillionaires, so that there's fairness for all. But she just self-contradicts herself like 99% of the time, every time she opens her mouth.
What this is about is saying, do we, as I said in those comments that you read out, do we want to be a country that invests in the things we need? Do we want to be a country that invests in housing? Do we want to be a country that invests in affordability, in things like a national school food program, in things like a national early learning and childcare program? Do we want to be a country that invests in economic growth, in things like infrastructure, in things like our ITC program, which is building the industrial transition? I think we need to make all of those investments.
That's and not all your government's spending money on.
I think the fair way to finance, you have to ask yourself, do you believe we need to make those investments? I do. And if you believe we need to make those investments, then you have to say, how are you going to finance them? Are you going to just take on more debt? I don't think that's right. I think the way to do it is through a fair tax policy, and that is exactly what this is.
Our Canadians, wouldn't it be understandable if they were also asking themselves, are we going to get a return on that investment? You haven't just spent money on the things you're talking about. You also spent money on contracts with McKinsey last week that the Auditor General said more than half of which she could not figure out if there was value for money. She also came to the same conclusion on ArriveCan. You have grown the public sector considerably while at the same time growing the size and the scope of the number of consultants that you've hired and contracted by 88% since you came into office, the reverse of what you promised to do in 2015. Why should Canadians be sure that while they are getting this additional tax for the investments you say are necessary, they will get a return on that investment?
So I think the onus is absolutely on the government to spend Canadians' money wisely and well.
And I would say that's problem number one, that you guys think that you are actually doing such a thing. You have spent the money in the worst possible way, as Vassy came with the facts and just laid it out. The amount of scandals that have come out, the amount of mismanaged funds, contracts being given out for jobs that could have been done by far cheaper individuals, probably a lot faster, contracts that went out that didn't even need to go out, and all the money that was spent on consultants. And the fact that you're about to try to defend yourself shows that you are absolutely disconnected from reality and what the Canadian public knows, sees, and tells you all the time.
One of the things that was in the budget that was really important for me is showing a decline in the size of the public service over the fiscal framework, a decline of 5,000 people. That's going to happen by attrition. No frontline services will be affected. But I put that in there very thoughtfully and intentionally because it was my view that if we were saying to Canadians, we're going to make significant investments based on tax fairness, I want to say to Canadians, and we're going to do it with care. But I do also want to really, push back, Vassy, against the notion that we don't need a government that invests. I do think
that's an unfair characterization. I'm saying, are Canadians getting return on those investments?
No, but it is actually the essential question here. Canadians have three essential choices before them. The first is, do you believe government needs to invest in you and in your country? Do you believe in things like government investing in housing so we can build more homes faster? Do you believe in things like a national program of early learning and childcare? Do you believe in things like the government investing $5 billion in basic research in universities as we have done? Do you believe in that? That's question number one.
I'll tell you what I do believe. I believe this sounds like a lot of communist talking points. You're essentially saying that the government is going to be mommy and daddy and take care of us all, and we don't have to do anything because you guys are essentially going to have programs for all. I wouldn't be surprised if next you're going to say, don't worry about eating because as the government, we'll control the farms, we'll provide you with all the nutrients and the food that you actually need, just like they do in a little place called North Korea. And you can see inklings of this already when they keep talking about this national food program for kids not to go hungry in school. When, as I said in the last video, make groceries more affordable for people and they can feed their own kids. They won't need the government for all that. But as she goes on to rattle off the next 2 points and then talk about John Diefenbaker for like the 19th time that she's done, and rinsing repeating the buck for a buck spiel, Vassy lays out some more hard facts saying, yeah, it's not that we're saying you shouldn't invest, but you have done a very poor job at it, and this is the resume to prove it.
Question number two is, if you believe in that, how do you think we should pay for it? And what we're saying is, we don't think you should pay for it by just taking on more debt. Canada is running a very fiscally responsible policy, and you saw the results of that with the Bank of Canada lowering interest rates. So then you have to say to yourself, okay, then what kind of a tax system are we going to use to finance it? And this move that we're making on capital gains, it really is about bringing more fairness to the tax system. It's about saying someone who's only income is a salary. Someone like a plumber, someone like a teacher, they just shouldn't be paying tax at a higher rate than someone who is a multimillionaire and whose principal income is through investment. And like the person who said it the best was actually a guy appointed by John Diefenbaker.
In fact, the idea of taxing capital gains in Canada was first broached by the government of Prime Minister John Diefenbaker. In fact, the idea of taxing capital gains in Canada was first broached by the government of Prime Minister John Diefenbaker,
who was kind of a conservative guy and who chaired a Royal Commission on Tax Reform, Kenneth Carter. And he said, a buck is a buck is a buck.
He insisted, a buck is a buck is a buck. And he memorably insisted, a buck is a buck is a buck.
And that was the principle that guided his recommendation that we tax capital gains in Canada. I think that is absolutely right, and I'm glad we're doing it.
I understand the fairness argument they're putting forward. The third question that you didn't flag, though, was the one that I'll circle back to. It's not just if you think you should invest or not. It's if you think the investments will actually pay off in the long term, that there will be a return on the investments you're making for Canadians. There is so much, but there are so much evidence that that's not the case. There are more people that, let me finish, there are more people than ever going to the food bank. GDP per capita is on the decline right now. Productivity, our own Deputy Bank of Canada governor is sounding an alarm about how terrible our productivity is relative to the United States. What is the evidence that you're going to take all that money from this new tax scheme and invest in ways that actually better our country? And don't you bear responsibility for the place we're at right now?
Vassy must have had her Wheaties before this interview, because she just came out swinging, hitting her with all the facts that we've been covering on this channel about how poor this government has been running. And as Freeland tries to defend herself mentioning some of these programs, Vassy comes back with another jab saying, yeah, but you guys have had 9 years to deal with this and you've been failing. And I think at this point, her and her team realize they got to throw in the towel, because you'll see at the end Vassy say, oh, well, looks like your team is saying they got to get you out of here.
Vassy, I am 100% sure that our massive investments in early learning and childcare are already making life more affordable for Canadians and are already helping our economy. We have the highest participation rate of women of working age in Canadian history. Early learning and childcare has really helped to drive that, and that is helping our economy to grow, and it is helping Canadian families, and it is helping Canadian kids at the same time. I am equally absolutely sure that our investments in housing are absolutely necessary. What Canada is suffering from today is a legacy of underinvestment in housing, and we are turning that around and fixing it. And I am absolutely sure that we had to do this in a fiscally responsible way. And for me, the proof of the pudding is that just a few days ago, the Bank of Canada was able to lower interest rates, first country in the G7. So fairness for every generation. It's the right thing for Canada and Canadians, and it is working.
I have to leave it on that note. I'm being told in my ear your staff needs to get you out. So thank you very much, Minister. I appreciate you making the time for the conversation.
It's absolutely wild that they keep putting this woman in front of the camera. However, I think they might second guess it when it comes to Vassy and her show after this appearance. But as always, this is just my take on the whole situation. I'd love to hear from you guys, so let me know in the comment section below. I do appreciate it if you made it this far. If you did, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.